Now, my beloved continent, Africa, viva Africa. And you may wonder why I'm so excited. I'm happy because South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa is in Russia for the 16th edition of the BRICS summit. And of course, he's going to meet many leaders, including China's president, the Prime Minister of India, hopefully the UAE leadership because they've joined, Ethiopia's leadership because Ethiopia has been onboarded, all these leaders. And the most interesting thing is that South Africa has been the only member of BRICS nation from Africa since 2010, and now we're in 2024. That's 14 years later. And guess what? Today we've onboarded another country. And that country is Ethiopia. And with these meetings, of course, if we're starting, you know where Ethiopia is on the map, and you know where South Africa is. So now the African nations in between, we're surrounded by nations who are members of BRICS. So what does this mean to us? One, it could mean good things for us because we are in a position to trade more, not as in between, but if these nations are able to influence each other, then we're at a position where we can trade with Russia more, perhaps. And China, of course, by now, we trade with these nations, but there could be additions to that. There could be additions with trade with India, and such nations. Cyril's trip to Russia, he's met with Russia's President Vladimir Putin, and they've held bilateral talks with Putin on the sidelines of the BRICS Summit of Emerging Economies. So during the meeting, Putin held trade and economic relations between the two nations, adding that they can collaborate in areas including energy, agriculture, industry, and science. Of course, these are nations. Russia is a nation that's way ahead in terms of these sectors. And African nations onboarding or, getting close relationships means we could benefit from, the knowledge and skills that they have in these areas and also do an exchange because we're also not bad in agriculture. Like in Kenya, agriculture is huge. So if we're able to onboard African nations in such summits, then it's possible to grow the African economy. So Russia has been building friendships across Africa in nations, especially West Africa, such as across Burkina Faso, which is a country led by an army junta, Ibrahim Traore. There's Mali, which is also led by Assimi Goïta, colonel. He's also an army junta. These are guys who took over after the coup. And it's interesting that Russia is friends with these presidents and the nations at large. So Russia's influence has been gaining ground across Africa in recent years. And this is placing the continent at the crux of the growing geopolitical contest between the Kremlin and the White House. This is because, one, Russia wants to be more friends in Africa, build more friendships in Africa. On the other hand, the United States believe they are the superpower and the upper hand that controls a lot of what happens in Africa. This is an open secret. It's no news, I think. Across Africa, we've seen they have their army bases across. They added Kenya as a NATO alliance the other day. They want to set base, I think, in Ethiopia or something. So with all these things, you can see if Russia is able to build friendships, then the United States will feel threatened, or rather they will feel their influence in Africa is, getting hold as these nations aboard the Russian way of operation. So during the meeting, Putin noted that trade and economic relations between Russia and South Africa are generally at a good level. There was a slight decline, and this actually came, I think, after ICC issued a warrant of arrest for the Russian president, and then the BRICS summit of last year happened in South Africa, and he didn't turn up. So sort of maybe that might have affected trade, but really he says it's now picked up and it's back to where, to a nice place. And the turnover has actually begun to grow, with growth amounting to 3% in January to August of this year. So Putin promised an increase and diversifying of mutual trade and investment, and he promised the areas of cooperation from agriculture, science, industry, all these spaces. Ramaphosa, on the other hand, praised the relationship, stating that they will continue to see Russia as a valued ally, as a valued friend who supported them from the beginning, from the days of the struggle of apartheid, right through to now. So more than 20 leaders have been attending this summit and defying expectations that the war in Ukraine, Western sanctions and arrest warrant would, cause many leaders not to show up. But with these leaders attending and with all these nations showing up, basically Russia is telling the world, we are not segregated. If anything, the people of these countries support us. The leaders of these nations agree with what we stand for, and with such instance, then they are sending a message. And I'm sure the US is really disturbed. But now what is causing trouble with the US now, they can't participate much because they're also having an election that's coming up next month. And so this meeting it's causing them trouble, yes. But there's nothing much they can do because all their resources are geared towards, the presidency. So in March 2023, the ICC, or rather International Criminal Court in The Hague, issued an arrest warrant for Putin. And why they issued this, they accused him of the war crime of illegally deporting children from Ukraine. So that's why a lot of nations that are allied to the treaty cannot host President Putin, or rather he cannot travel in these nations, because if he does, then he stands to be arrested. But that's really not, we cannot confidently speak, because he's visited some nations and he's not been arrested. So I don't know if they would ever arrest Putin, by the way. That would be interesting to see. Russia's spreading influence in Africa has raised alarm in some outside countries, while others are eyeing the potential benefits. Diplomatically, Russia's overarching goal is to gain more support for its vision of a multipolar world order based on the weakened Western influence. And African countries do not want to be forced to choose sides in what they see as, for Africa, basically, we do not want people to dictate to us that you have to align to this for US to support you. You have to align to this for European to support you. All these things. We don't like them as Africa. And why Africa is welcoming Russia is because they're not dictating on how member countries or countries that are allies to them behave. So with such things, policymakers really have a lot of work to do. And one of the key things that I remember raised a lot of issues in Africa was during the COVID-19 pandemic. And the West focused on, working on their vaccines and sorting their countries. And Africa came as an afterthought. You can imagine what we went through as Africa. And then you still want us to dictate, you still want to dictate to us on who we relate with. I mean, it doesn't make sense at all. And how that vaccine was distributed raised a lot of issues across Africa, because then we learned that actually we are not, we may have been pro-West, but then our Westernness added no value to us because they were dictating how they want us to behave. And then we had a health crisis and they were watching from afar. So with such things, then Africa is standing up for itself, and Africa is starting to make decisions for itself. So something else is that the way the Western has reacted towards the Russia-Ukraine war by giving a lot of support to Western, to Ukraine. A lot of aid has gone to Ukraine. And the sort of aid that even nations like the US has sent to Ukraine is something that has never been experienced in Africa. So it opened our eyes to see that the United States or the West will put in money, resources, or aid where they feel their interests are. As for Africa, it's an afterthought. We'll help them, but we'll help them with So we've learned the hard way. So now we're at a point where we make choices and we choose who to relate with for the value that it gives us as, as ourselves. So the shift can also be, this shift of Africa wanting to, do away with the West is the failures of West intervention to many African countries. And one of the issues has actually been keeping Africa away from the leadership of top organizations or this union such as the G7. Like we've had African presidents raising issues with them not being included in, such organizations. I mean, if you're having a G7 meetings and you're inviting Africans, you are inviting Africans as, etc. They're not coming to speak. They are coming to listen, and basically their listenership is not a choice of do you want to. It's usually a thing that's dictated. This is what the world is, because they don't even vote on different matters. So Africa has gotten to a point where they feel it's now time for us to stand up for ourselves. We've been used too much, and the Western must rethink how they how they relate with us as Africa. And experts have actually been arguing that to stem Russia's growing influence, the United States and Europe need to build on previous diplomatic efforts and seek more equal partnerships with African nations. Basically, Africa wants to be treated as a partner, not as a subject, because being a subject has happened long enough. And as Africans, we are tired of being treated as subjects. And now we feel it's time for us to be treated as partners. And any nation that works with us as partners, we will work with them. If a nation does not want to treat us as partners, then I'm sorry, we will make a choice. And our choice will not be influenced by what the West thinks or what the US wants. It is based on our interests also, because we've learned it's a matter of interest. Yeah? So as Africans or people who align with Africa, share with us in the comments section what you think and how you feel about this. And if actually what you think about South Africa taking the first step and now welcoming Ethiopia on board. And let's see how the BRICS takes the country. And I hope actually BRICS can get this issue of their, their own, doing away with the dollar so that we have a BRICS pay method and that many African nations can on board, because we've seen what the dollar has done to us and we are tired. It's time for change. Share with us in the comments section. We'll catch you on the next episode. Thank you for watching.